Someone who went from being one of the most acclaimed directors in Hollywood to struggling to get his recent films released outside of Europe is Roman Polanski. For a while, his crime and a run from the law did not seem to have too much effect in his career until it eventually caught up with him. So what led to this point, and why did it take so long? Polanski's rise started early in his directing career when he received acclaim for his first feature film, Knife in the Water. Made in Poland and released in 1962, it got him instant worldwide attention and was nominated for an Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film. After a few years in France, he moved to England, and among the movies he directed there was the psychological horror film Repulsion. That film was very well received and remains highly influential among horror filmmakers. He also directed the horror comedy The Fearless Vampire Killers, which is where he first met Sharon Tate, with the two eventually getting married. Polanski moved to Hollywood after Paramount head Robert Evans offered him the directing job on Rosemary's Baby. That movie was particularly successful, with Polanski also receiving an Oscar nomination for his adaptation of Ira Levin's book. However, tragedy hit when on August 9, 1969, the Manson family went to Tate and Polanski's house and murdered her and 4 friends. It was an event that shocked Hollywood as well as Polanski. At the time, he was developing The Day of the Dolphin, but he then dropped out of the film following the murders. He would instead make an adaptation of William Shakespeare's Macbeth, which received a lot of attention at the time for its violence, although Polanski felt anything he made would have been looked at as a response to his wife's killing. One of the most successful movies of his career was the detective film Chinatown. It was widely acclaimed, particularly for Robert Towne's screenplay, and would receive 11 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture and Director. In March 1977, Roman Polanski was arrested on 6 charges involving the drugging and sexual assault of 13-year-old Samantha Gailey during a photo shoot. He pleaded not guilty, but eventually agreed to a plea bargain. This drew major headlines, although he was still hired to direct the movie Hurricane and flew to Tahiti in Europe to prepare for the movie. The judge was surprisingly lenient in allowing him to travel on multiple occasions to make this movie, although he would eventually spend 42 days in prison for psychiatric evaluation. The trial and producer Dino De Laurentiis's uncertainty of whether Polanski would even be fully able to make the movie led to him being removed from the project and replaced by Swedish director Jan Troell. Fearing that the judge would sentence him to several years in prison, in February 1978 he decided to flee the United States and move to Europe to avoid that. This essentially made him a fugitive from the law, and he settled in France, where they've refused to extradite him to the American authorities. Now, you might think a director being charged for sex with a minor and other offenses, becoming a fugitive, and choosing to not enter countries like the United States and the United Kingdom to avoid being arrested would hurt his career. And yet, because standards at the time were different, I guess, that seemed to barely affect it. He got right to work in his next film, Tess, based on Thomas Hardy's book, Tess of the Urbervilles. Premiering in 1979 and released in the United States the following year, the film was praised by critics and received 6 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture and Best Director. So it appears this scandal was not something that affected the views of the Oscar voters. He did not direct too many films during the next few decades, although it was more because of trying to get financing and making sure he had the right project. He directed movies like his passion project Pirates, which was a critical and commercial flop, along with the well-liked thriller Frantic, starring Harrison Ford. And again, despite him being a fugitive from the US, he would still be considered for movies by Hollywood studios. Steven Spielberg even asked Polanski, who was a Holocaust survivor whose parents had been killed in the concentration camps, if he wanted to direct Schindler's List. However, he turned it down, as he was not quite ready to direct a film about the subject. Polanski would eventually depict the Holocaust when he directed The Pianist, which got fantastic reviews and strong box office. It won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, Best Film and Director at the BAFTAs, and was nominated for 7 Oscars, including for Best Picture and Director. With this award's attention on his new film, the stories of his past behavior and run from justice returned to the spotlight. Supposedly, the person who made sure this was all highlighted again was Harvey Weinstein. So not exactly a moral citizen doing this because he felt it was the right thing to do. Instead, it was more to do with Weinstein's name being on the 4 other Best Picture nominees that year. Samantha Gailey, who had since gotten married and moved to Hawaii, would be interviewed about it and said that as horrible as his past actions were, that should have no bearing on whether he should be judged for his work. Polanski would win the Best Director Oscar for The Pianist, even receiving a standing ovation for it, though he was not at the ceremony for obvious reasons. He would continue to direct films, some with major stars. These included his adaptation of Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist, the political thriller The Ghost Rider starring Ewan McGregor, and the comedy Carnage with Kate Winslet and Jodie Foster. In 2009, he was arrested in Switzerland while trying to attend the Zurich Film Festival. This was on the orders of the United States, which meant he could have been extradited and eventually sent to prison. This resulted in a petition with several filmmakers and actors calling for his release, with big names like Harrison Ford, Guillermo del Toro, and Martin Scorsese among those signing it. However, the petition failed to mention precisely the reason why the Swiss police would arrest him, only referring to it as an episode that happened years ago. Feels like it was purposely missing a lot of crucial details. He was eventually released some months later and went back to working on his next projects. In 2017, following the start of the Harvey Weinstein scandal and the Me Too movement, there was renewed scrutiny over the Roman Polanski case. While Samantha Gailey has largely forgiven him and even met with him, other women would come forward with their own allegations. Actress Charlotte Lewis had already told her story of Polanski abusing her when she was 16 some years earlier, and other actresses would also reveal he had sexually assaulted them. The Academy decided to expel Polanski after doing the same with Weinstein and Bill Cosby, citing their codes of conduct. He would try suing the Academy over this, but he lost the case. This would also affect the distribution of his films. His psychological thriller, based on a true story, was acquired for North American distribution by Sony Pictures Classics. However, following the increased interest in Polanski's crimes, they dropped the film, and it still is not seen in American release. His next movie, An Officer and a Spy, has also not been released in North America. In Europe, though, the film went ahead as scheduled and won 3 awards at the Césars, the French equivalent of the Oscars, including Polanski for Best Director and Best Adaptation. The nominations were widely criticized by French women's groups, and after Polanski was announced as the winner, some of the nominees walked out of the ceremony. Eventually, even more of the French film industry decided to no longer support him. He struggled to find French financing for his comedy The Palace, eventually relying on Italian, Polish, and Swiss investors to pay for the film. He also struggled to cast the movie, with several actors turning it down. Like An Officer and a Spy, it did not receive a release in English-speaking territories and played in only one theater in Paris, which pulled the film after protests. The Palace did not even crack $1 million worldwide. So is Roman Polanski's film career finished? Well, it was recently revealed he has plans to direct a new movie in Poland, but even if it gets made, it's highly unlikely he'll get any sort of wide distribution outside of Europe if his last few movies are any indication. He's almost 92 years old, so he probably does not have many new movies left to make anyway. But the question is, why did it take so long for the scandal to hurt his career? This can probably be chalked up to being a different time, but it's still strange that there remains support for him, even though he did something that would ordinarily be viewed as indefensible, and after he fled rather than face a potential prison term. Of course, you can still watch his films, although it's perfectly understandable someone feeling uncomfortable and choosing not to. But looking back, it's odd that Roman Polanski's inappropriate behavior towards an underage girl was largely shrugged off for many years until it became unavoidable to ignore. See you next time.